Okay, here we go. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody's having a wonderful day. Hope some of y'all sitting there eating lunch as we're getting going. Today, we're going to be talking about withdrawal strategies in retirement. Cover a couple of different things and a lot of consideration. Let's get right to it. All right, so it's often said that how you get your money out of a retirement plan and savings is just as important as how you saved it. But first, we're going to really start even more elementary, and it's honestly one of the more basic questions that I get, and that is, how do I access my money when I retire? How does that work? Well, first of all, it depends on where your money is. There's really a couple of different choices that you're going to have. A lot of you in your retirement plans, whether it's a 401k or 403b, you might decide to leave it in the plan and take withdrawals from there. You might choose to roll it over to an individual retirement account. I'll talk in just a second a little bit of the pros and cons of that. But if your money is staying in your employer-sponsored qualified plan, then you're going to have some contact initially with your custodian. Number one, to kind of understand the specific options available to you within your plan. Each plan is different. You would think that distribution rules are universal amongst plans, and they are not. It is actually very specific to your plan. And there are different ways that you can take those distributions. In addition to this, some custodians might have a limit on the amount of distributions that you can take. That might play into where you leave it in the plan, quite frankly, or move it out. In most cases, all of the custodians that we deal with, and we deal with almost all of them, they do charge fees for the withdrawals. And some of them only allow for yearly distributions, semi-annual. Others allow for monthly. But it's important whenever you get to that point before you get to the point of needing that, is to kind of identify, what the rules are. If you're allowed to take it out, monthly, or if you have to take it out yearly, and you might not want to do that. Some custodians will allow you to take it in terms of a withdrawal as a direct deposit to your bank. Some will not. Some will send a check. It's pretty universal that regardless of what your marginal tax bracket that you fall into, that the custodians will withhold 20%. That is pretty standard across the board. And one of the pros is that if you leave it in the plan, when you do turn 73, or if it's 10 years really from now, it'll go up again to 75. But they will help you on an annual basis just determine your required minimum distribution in according to what age that you are. Initially, we have to do some legwork to kind of figure out what those rules are. We are here to help you kind of, interpret some of those things. If you have those questions before you get there, we have the rules of all the plans and understand this very well. At its basic core, you'll have to fill out a distribution form or paperwork and submit it to your custodian in order to access that money, regardless of how you do that. And we can be here for a source of support during that process if you need it. Let's contrast that a little bit with an IRA. An IRA is an individual retirement account, for those that might not know. It is a qualified vehicle, just like your 401k. So let's say that you decide that you're going to roll that money from a 401k, 403b to your individual retirement account or IRA. There is no taxes that are created as a result of that roll. It is going from one qualified vehicle to another. And because of that, it will roll over and not generate any taxes as a result of that. typically, there are a bit more flexibility when it comes time to taking withdrawals from an IRA. You know, my boss has always said, and I think it's very true up until this point, that employer-sponsored plans like 401ks and 403bs, those are vehicles that are really inherently designed for accumulating assets, and they do a really nice job by being able to sharing fees and keeping, you know, hopefully fees low in the plans because of the group dollars that are at work. They make it very easy because it takes it directly out of your payroll, but they're not as well designed for the withdrawal process. IRAs are a little bit more geared to that. Now, I'm just saying that that's the way it is today. I do think that the business is going to continue to evolve, and that 401ks and 403bs, I think over time, will be in a position closer to IRAs. That is just a personal feeling that I have based on certain things that have been, you know, happening within the industry for quite some time. But back to the IRAs, typically there are no fees for withdrawals. You can set up a direct fee from the IRA custodian, and it will be an automatic drip on whatever day that you want on a monthly basis. For example, you could do it as needed if you wanted to. So it doesn't have to be automatic, but those typically can be set up as an electronic fund transfers. And you know, when you go to an IRA, there are a myriad of custodians out there, but there are typically no withdrawal fees like there would be in 401ks. We have some plans, for example, that might charge as much as $99 per distribution. If you take that monthly, that's $1,200 a year. It's a decent expense tacked on top to it. So it's important to kind of understand what your plan's fees might be. Like I said before, you could set up a monthly draw electronically. You can withdraw a la carte. Meaning that if you just need some extra money, you can call the custodian of the IRA or an advisor maybe that is managing that and initiate those withdrawals as needed. In IRAs, there is no hard, fast rule for withholding. That is optional to you. If your effective tax rate, let's say, is 15% on a federal basis, you can withhold 15% from each withdrawal that you get. You can figure out about what that would be and gross it up so you get the specific amount of money that you want to. There's no right or wrong with that. Or you can not withhold any and just have to pay it all at the before tax time the next year and just withdraw that amount you need from your account. Now, I would say this is that the RMDs, the required minimum distributions in IRAs, are not figured for you. The custodians, you know, they might help you with it. They might charge you a fee for that. If it's managed by an advisor, then the advisor obviously would help you to do that. It's part of the service that you pay them for, and most cases that I see. So those are the general you know, guidelines in terms of that. Some IRAs have you know, fees in order just to have the IRA. Some do not. There are platforms out there that are free. And so if you have more questions about those kind of things, feel free to reach out. We can kind of talk through that a little bit more. Okay, so, you know, obviously this is about taking money out of your account. Let me see, there was a chat. Let's see. I'm going to answer one question from Eric as we get going. So can you meet the RMD requirements of the 401k and then take advantage of the benefits of the IRA for withdrawing by moving the RMD from 401k rather moving the required minimum distribution from the 401k to an IRA rather than from 401k to a bank? Yeah, you could do that, Eric. I'm not sure that there's a huge discernible advantage for that. I mean, but it doesn't count for your RMD if you're just transferring it from your 401k to the IRA. I mean, you could move over that amount and take the amount that you need to take for the year. But there's no discernible advantage by, you know, moving that amount of money from a 401k to an IRA, honestly. If you're still working, and I know, Eric, you still are working, The advantage I would say that the 401k has while you're still working is that there is no required minimum distribution in a 401k while you are still working. Now, once you leave, you're subject to it. Once you're no longer there. If you are still working and have money in an IRA and you turn 73, you still are responsible for taking a required minimum distribution from the IRA, even though you're still working. So, my advice is to kind of figure out one or the other prior to leaving. Considerations for thinking about this whole deal of taking money out is maybe you can think about delaying taking withdrawals. Are you in a financial position that you don't have to pull money from these accounts? Hugely beneficial if you're in that position. If you delay taking money out from your retirement accounts, it will last longer. I mean, I know that seems very elementary, but it's just very true, and it's exponential, in fact. Can you consider maybe withdrawing only the income from your investments in your portfolio? It's actually one of the strategies we'll talk about. How about delaying withdrawal from Roth until later? Roth is one of those things that, if you're in a lower tax bracket, or you're not going to be in a higher one, it's super advantageous to delay your Roth withdrawals, because, you want that to get as big as possible from a tax-free basis. Because then when you get into those RMD years or later, you can take money out, without having any taxes on that. Big consideration, taking too much out too soon, or it's along the lines with, at the bottom of here, accelerating those withdrawals. You've got to be really careful about that, particularly during periods of market volatility. Also, and I'm going to share some of this, at some point in time if people have it, but I'm really big, there are a lot of free resources online and calculators online that you can do to help look at some of these things that will tackle things like inflation, seeing how long your money will last. If let's say you're 15 years from retirement, 10 years from retirement, you want to see how much money you're going to have there based on your savings. I'm really big on trying to make sure that money will last. That plays into number one in terms of when you delay taking those withdrawals. And then the biggest consideration is if you have no plan at all and you're just going to wing it. You're going to hear me say this, but hope is not a strategy, and it doesn't do you any good. Some people are afraid of learning those answers, but it's very important that we know the answers to those questions, because because it's better to be informed, really simply put. Okay, so factors that you can't control that absolutely can impact your withdrawal strategy. There are three questions to this, and I've told you that before. How much money do you need? When do you need it? So when are you going to start taking money out of your accounts? And the last one is for how long? Well, that's the first one here, longevity. There's no way, if we know we're going to live 5 years or 35 years in retirement. And if we did, boy, it'd be a whole lot easier to deal with. Investment returns. We can't control those, but what we can control is our risk aspect that really contributes to fluctuations during market turbulence. And we'll get to asset allocation and risk on another, that will actually go out, I believe, next week. Look at the PDFs that will be coming out for those next week on that. Inflation, rising costs over time will absolutely influence how much you have in the future. And there are calculators out there that can help you with this. I'm going to give you a small example of this in a second. And then future expenses. I mean, obviously we can't pick every single expense, that's we might need 20 years from now. But my best advice to you is just expect that you might need slightly more than what you planned. And so to account for those kind of things. So, those risks to retirement that we talked about on the first one, inflation is a big one. And so if you look at this online, sorry, online, gosh, this slide right here, I know they're making fun of me, Emily's making fun of me for that. If you look at this right here, this assumes this is a couple or a person that is going to need $120,000. Is how much they're spending today in terms of their expenses. 120. Their expenses in retirement are going to be 153,000. 610. That is inflation. That is a 2.5% inflationary factor. That is as part of that. This is a 55-year-old. So in other words, if they're going to retire at 65, this is what this looks like. That their income need would be then, and then life expectancy. Look at the difference of that. This is 2.5% year-over-year.com, a year-over-year increase on that inflation. Obviously, with inflation, returns happen too. So that's the offset with that, is that you're going to be invested in hopefully in a reasonable risk platform that will help give you returns that will help offset that inflation over time. It's a big part of the deal. Obviously, you can see on the here, I use this calculator here, calcxml.com. There are a lot of them, and they have a huge section on retirement, and they have about 15 different retirement calculators in there. It's free. I use this in one-on-one meetings for like really quick calculations, particularly in time value money. But really important to kind of understand where it is today, versus what it could be in the future. Okay, so let's talk about specific strategies. Some of you all have probably heard of these. Some of you might not have. But let's start with the 4% rule. That seems to be the most popular. The 4% rule is when you withdraw 4% of your retirement savings in the first year of retirement, and in subsequent years, you might tack on an inflationary rate such as 2%, but it's generally 4% from your balance each year. So, for example, if you had $1 million saved under the strategy, you withdraw $40,000 during the first year of retirement. If you accounted for 2% inflation, the second year it'd be $40,800, and then the third year would be $41,616. So this is really just a hard, fast rule. There's been a long-standing rule as a quick and dirty that if you're able to do this, live off the 4%, that your money will last anywhere between 35 and 50 years, which is generally long enough in order for to get through your lifetime. And so it's not surprising why this isn't really easy to understand and it's out there. Potential advantages. Obviously, this has been a strategy that's long-standing. Many retirees value the strategy because it's really simple and easy to calculate and predictable in terms of what income you'll have in the next year even. But lately, I would say this approach has been criticized for not considering the effects of rising interest rates and market volatility. Indeed, if you retire on the onset of a steep decline, you could risk depleting your savings maybe a little bit too quickly, but generally that smooths out over time in my experience and what I've seen. But it is a potential. I mean, this last risk right here of stock market volatility, that's known as sequence of returns, and we'll get into that particularly in our last module. But sequence of returns risk, the risk that you pick is to help offset that. Next, we have fixed dollar withdrawals. Some retirees like to take out a fixed dollar amount over a specific period of time. So that's exactly what this is, the same amount. For example, you might withdraw $40,000 annually and then reassess at the end of maybe a 5-year period. The one thing this doesn't do is necessarily protect you against inflation, but it kind of does at the same time as well, because if inflation rises and you're still able to live off that lesser amount, then that's good, because you're not having to increase the money out that you need. But it is a risk. So in other words, your buying power does shrink with that $40,000 over time. Moreover, if your investments are down in value due to market volatility, you might need to sell more of your assets to kind of meet some of these withdrawal needs, but that's a risk on any one of these, by the way. Potential advantages is, this approach can simplify your personal money management. It's very easy. And if you're able to do this, it's, again, becomes predictable, that kind of thing. Fixed percentage withdrawals. Very similar to the ones that we've already have. This is where you set a percentage of your portfolio annually to be withdrawn. And that is kind of based on what your end of the year value is, which kind of makes that a disadvantage because some years you could be drawing more than others because your account value has been up. So let's say you had a portfolio of $1 million and you decide to take out that 4%. That 4% kind of gives you 40,000 on year one, but you can see in year two, if it's grown, you're taking out more. Year three, but look in year four, because the market might be down, that fixed percentage approach will cause you to have less to spend. Now, again, if you can make that work, that's okay. That's okay. There's nothing wrong or right about any of these, by the way, that kind of thing. This is probably one I would use the least. I mean, I try to look at people doing a couple of things with maybe living off their income and investments from their investments, dividends and those kind of things early on, and then reassess from then on. A systematic withdrawal plan, you only withdraw the income, like I was just saying. So in other words, the returns and the yield from your bonds and the dividends and or that are created from stocks. Because your principal remains intact in this is really designed, this really is one of the better ones that kind of really help you prevent you from running out of money. If you can live off just the income that your portfolio generates, you won't run out of money. You'll be able to spend more later if you need it. However, the income that you receive in any given year is going to vary. So, this is where some of these things like fixed income, those phrases actually come from, not just, because you're living off a certain amount of interest that you expect in that year and or dividends as well. There's also the risk that this amount you withdraw won't be able to pace inflation, but because your principal remains intact, you can always switch your strategy a little bit later in life in order to do that. So because the biggest advantage is the one I just mentioned, but because it only touches your income from interest and dividends, your portfolio maintains itself from a principal for the potential to grow even more. And then obviously, the amount you're going to take out every year is going to vary for sure. Lastly is a bucket strategy, and this is the one that I generally use in my profession more than any others. We use bucket strategy when it comes to managing money as a firm. With the bucket strategy, you withdraw assets, and this is just an example of the three buckets. You might have 4 buckets in your strategy. Everybody's a little bit different. Some people have cash, equities, and then fixed income, but you might have an additional bucket on top of that. But it's where you draw assets from these buckets. And under this strategy, your first bucket holds a percentage of your savings in cash. Often, and we combine this with some of your fixed income bucket in terms of your need, but often like 5 to 7 years of living expenses. That second one holds fixed income, so like bonds or guaranteed instruments, those kind of things. The third bucket contains your stocks. As you use your cash from the first bucket, you replenish it with earnings from your other buckets over time or growth. So when usually people call me and do a one-on-one, if they have an idea of what their income need is, and hopefully from the worksheets that you all got last week, you're in the process of figuring those things out and looking at those things. But for me, in terms of what risk you should take, it has to do with, a combination of this bucket and this bucket. I want a minimum of 7 years, usually between these two buckets. of income needs in there, and living expenses. That way, if the market is down, we don't have to pull from this equity bucket. And it gives this time to recover and grow again, and grow beyond where it was, hopefully, in order to replenish this. That way, you're not taking money from stocks when they're down and losing that potential return in the future. By setting aside several years of your living expenses, so I mentioned before 7, your investments would ideally have more time to grow, and sustaining as much of your savings you can for as long as possible. This approach allows your, it's a constant review. You have to kind of look at this on a regular basis, quite honestly. And it does give you a sense of control over your asset allocation within there. And the biggest disadvantage that this one takes it's a little bit more labor intensive to kind of figure out, okay, where I'm at in terms of how many years of income do I have in these 2 buckets that are met. But one reason I like it is because it gets us in a position that when we retire, that we know that we've got, a certain amount of time of our income needs that are already completely met, walking around money. And so 7 to 10 years. So, let's use that as an easy math. If your income need is $40,000 a year, and let's say you had $1 million and your income need is $40,000 a year, I would want at least 7 to 10 years of that income need in these 2 buckets here. So let's just call it 10 years because it's easy math. I would want $400,000 of your $1 million between these fixed income and cash buckets. And then, so you might be 60-40 in that. Could you be less? Sure, you could go 50-50 and still make that work. But it kind of gives us better planning and better strategies in which buckets we're pulling from with the varying market conditions. And then lastly, you can mix and match all these. I mean, you can start with the systematic and just draw your income and dividends, and you can switch that to 4%. You can do a bucket strategy and get that 7 years of income. But if you don't need more than the 4%, then you're just going to be on the 4% rule with buckets. There's a lot of different ways, obviously, that we can do this. Lastly, there's no right or wrong thing for each person. Don't get too bogged down on the 3 or 4 different ones that we talked to. Focus in on the 4% and maybe the bucket, and kind of decide how you want to do it, what's going to be best for you and what you want. If you're going to hire an advisor, talk to your advisor about, what do you think we should do in terms of that? They might use any of those. And again, none of them are right or wrong, as long as you're keeping your eye on the ball of those inflation things and the decline of your spending power over time. So, if you have any specific questions, obviously, here's my contact information. We're going to send this out and that kind of thing as well. Let me get back here and stop the share, and let's look at what kind of questions that we have. If I can get it. One second here. There we go. Sorry, I had to stop something else. Okay. Let's see. Any questions from anybody today? Now, Eric, the one thing I would say that you could do involving the IRA is you can do what's called a backdoor IRA with what you're talking about, where you actually take your required minimum distribution from there, pay tax on it, and put the difference that you don't need in a Roth. You can do that. Anybody have any questions about getting money out? What determines the age of 73 to begin? Rebecca, are you talking about the required minimum distributions? So that was 72 until December. The Secure Act 2.0 passed in December, and it raised the age of required minimum distributions to 73. What that simply means is that if you haven't started taking a certain amount of money out of your IRAs or 401ks, assuming that you're retired, if you haven't taken a certain amount, that you have to start taking a minimum distribution. It is based on your age, and it increases, and it's your December 31st balance times an IRS factor table based on your age, and it is designed so as you get older, you take out more. I always say that this is, the reason they're required minimum distributions, because the government is tired of you hoarding your money and they want you to spend it so they can get some of theirs. Just the truth. So if you aren't going to be retiring for another 10 years, that required minimum distribution age will escalate, to 75 as well. James asks, is last week's session recording also available with the worksheet? Yes. I'm not sure if the worksheet's been posted to the website yet. I think that we were in process of doing that, but the recording is definitely already up. Last week, there was no actual live session. It was just the worksheets with some instructions. We had both basically a budgeting worksheet that will help you kind of prepare, going through all of your spending needs and getting that down on paper. And there was also a assets and liabilities sheet for you to keep a net worth statement with that. Okay, let's see, go back up to Lim. How does long-term care affect these buckets? Do we need to increase any of these buckets? Well, I guess that would depend if you have a long-term care insurance policy, or obviously the older that you get, Lim, the more you're going to have to take out based on that required minimum distribution. So some of that is going to be put to use from that. I would say this, that as long as you're maintaining, and sometimes you're going to be a little bit less than 7 years in terms of income needs on those bucket strategies, and sometimes you're going to be more. There's some factors that go into that. I'll give you an example. A year ago in December, not this last December, but a year ago in December, the markets obviously were still in good shape. 2022 was a rough year, but before then, we were in this really long period of expansion. And because it was, the longer it goes past that 7 years, the more likelihood of a pretty good correction or adjustment, because we think that markets revert to their averages over time. So if it's way above its historical average, we will start increasing the amount of money that we have in that cash and fixed income bucket for our clients. So we got up to 10, almost 11 years in terms of a multiple during that time. So it is fluid. And just so everybody knows, the reason the 7 years comes up with is that if you look backwards on a chart of from one market high to the next, the average is about 7 years. It's gone past that a few times, and it's been slightly below that. But in general, if you look backwards on a graph from one high to the next, and the highs might be different, and we don't know the highs till they've already occurred. So it's a backward looking metric, but that's generally where the 7 years from one high to the next. And that way you don't have to necessarily guess of where you're at in that cycle, if you will. Also, let's see, Joyce asked, is there any consideration of the new 10-year rule for children? This is very disappointed. I inherited some IRAs and stretched the RMDs out. Not an option for our kids. Joyce, you are preaching to the choir, girl. I mean, absolutely, that one broke my heart. I thought it was a terrible offset. The increasing required minimum distribution was a terrible offset in order for the 10-year rollout period. There really is no option. Joyce, the best thing you can look to do is possibly convert some of that stuff early in retirement, particularly if your income is going to be down and your marginal tax bracket is going to be less than your working years. Then you can convert some of your traditional pre-tax holdings to Roth. That may benefit you in the long run. It depends on how long you live, but it will definitely benefit your kids no matter what. I hated that. It took away stretch IRAs is what they were known as. I was very disappointed in that. And it kind of goes back to, I've been saying this for quite some time, but I do think the taxes are going up for people, for everybody in the future. And that's a great example of why. I mean, that is a move that the government made that didn't raise taxes, but it certainly was going to create the ability for the government to get money sooner. And which is that's what they want and need. As far as consideration for that, I'd have to have a better idea of what your total assets look like. If you have any taxable accounts, obviously real estate, it gets a stepped up basis if you leave houses and those kind of things. But in an IRA or 401k, there's really no way around that 10-year rule. And for some people, it's 10% a year. It makes most sense. And for others, you wait and let it grow more and take it out strategically toward the end. I hope that helps. But yeah, that one, one of the very first books I read, my dad gave me a book. It's like the second book I read, actually. And it's called How to Parlay Your IRA to a Family Fortune. It's a really small book. I was like 16, 17, dorky kid reading about IRA books, but stretch IRAs. But yeah, that's gone away, unfortunately. Do Roth IRAs also fall under required minimum distribution rules? They do not. They do under the inherited IRAs, but it doesn't really matter because there's no taxes on them. So you have to take it out within 10 years, but there's no taxes. So in that case, you just wait as long as you can on that. But Roth IRAs on required minimum distribution rules, they do not, or Roth accounts, they do not fall under that category. Eric, if you're still working and have 401ks from previous employers, do you have to take the RMDs from those previous employers' 401ks, even though you're still working for another employer? The answer to your question, Eric, is that they're going to probably contact you and say you need to take an IRA. I will say this, I've talked to accountants about this. As long as you take out the amount that you're really supposed to for the year in aggregate, I have accountants that recommend that, and they say they can take it all from this account, but as long as they take out this much, and then they take into account how much they should take out. So I have seen people do it that way. My father did it that way for quite some time from a couple of different sources. However, when it's left in a 401k, those companies are going to process RMDs, and they're gonna do each one, Eric. So I would also say this, that if you have 401ks from other employers, and you're reaching RMD age, I would put them all into one, because then you won't have to take them out. It's only for the employer that you're still working, if you're still working, that you don't have to take the RMDs, and they will make you, they'll make you take it out even if you're working with another company. So I would definitely look to consolidate those just from that standpoint. Just my opinion on that. It makes it easier, but the companies themselves will require you to take it out. And I've seen it where they send letters and contact people, and in some cases they'll process an RMD and then just send it to you. Contact your Congress representative, senator to retract that 10-year rule. Man, I bet it was that simple, but the Secure Act 2.0 had a lot more stuff in it than the first one did, and it didn't touch that one. And it just kind of goes to show you, it's, the government needs money. So put those previous 401ks into your current. Yeah, that's what I would do, Eric. Sure would. Sure would. And in some cases, I've seen people, if they have IRAs, roll their IRAs into their 401k just to avoid taking the required minimum distributions. I would also mention too, I have seen this, by the way, so it's something to consider, because I've seen this in some of our plans. It's rare, but it happens. I've seen people where they retire and they were already above required minimum distribution age, and they retire on December 31st, whatever year. When they retire, because they retired in that year, the year before, it doesn't matter, December 31st, the last day of the year is their technical day. They have to take an RMD for that year and the coming year. So in other words, if you retire on December 31st, 2023, and you're already age 73, you have to take the required minimum distribution for 2023, even though it's over. And I've seen it where people had to take out a large amount of money, and they just had to basically took 2 years, because you're gonna have to take out 2024 at some point in time as well. So normally I would definitely say keep that in mind if you fall in that category, but that's pretty rare. Q&A, let's see. If you have 401k funds from with a previous employer, is it better to roll it to the new employer or into an IRA? I would guess the real answer to that question really depends on how close you are to retirement and if you're going to move one or all of it to an IRA. I certainly think it's easiest to have it all together. But if you're going to retire, say in 3 or 4 years, and you're going to put it all in an IRA anyways, then I don't think then I would just either wait or go on and put it in the IRA if it were me. I have both, and I'm 47. Now, I can't even really say why, other than just I've had an IRA forever. I don't actively save into my IRA. It's money that I had from where I was self-employed and did some stuff before. And so I just manage that in its own bucket, and then have a 401k, obviously here at work. Any other questions? Those are good questions, everybody. It's really good, really good. And I hope that answered the Q&A question as well. You're welcome, Bridget. Thank you. Appreciate you. Yeah, so don't get bogged down in it. I mean, this is stuff that we can talk about one-on-one, but really the mechanism of how do I get that? It's, I make recommendations both ways for people. It just depends on, when they're going to start withdrawing from those accounts, and there's fee considerations of how much they're going to be paying in one collectively versus another. But the IRA is definitely a little bit easier to set up an automatic drip versus if your plan only allows you to take it once a year. Honestly, that's not ideal in my opinion, because you're having to take it out, and let's say the market was down big. I prefer taking money out closer to how you averaged it in, and you put it in every 2 weeks. Obviously taking it out every 2 weeks, you don't have to do, you can do it once a month. I prefer that in terms of a dollar cost averaging out the same way that you did in, and I hope that makes a little bit of sense. But a lot of it just depends on, what your plan allows and the fees of that. I kind of think those fees will continue to compress and come down over time. I have a big belief in that, because fee compression has been going on in our industry, particularly, in the institutional side of our industry for quite some time. And I think that's going to continue. So look forward to it, Eric. Let's talk soon. I always enjoy our talks. We talk about getting off trying to solve world problems. Eric and I, we've tried it a few times, that's for sure. Any other questions? I'm taking too much of your time already, but any other questions? Really good questions. Very welcome. Alyssa, would you type in what is coming out next week really quickly? I know we have our risk allocation, but what comes out next week these are not recordings or videos. If you could type that in there, that would be awesome. Thank you, Brenda. Hope you're doing well. You too, Debbie. Appreciate it. Trying to think of what I should know this. I'm not prepared, and I apologize. But yeah, we'll have 2 more pieces come out. We have the Social Security piece next week, and then one other, I believe, as well. That might be the assessing your risk one, I think is what it is. So look for those. Be 2 days next week, and then I think we have another tax one. Oh no, we have another tax one and a couple more recorded ones as well. If there's any specific questions you all wish that I cover, let me know. I'm thinking about maybe doing something a little bit different on the final wrap up and doing just like a really quick, very slow and very general case study in terms of how to maybe use a couple of calculators online and those kind of things and go through the process of what someone has once they've gotten those information. I think that might be beneficial to you all. I haven't fully decided that, but I think that would be a good one. And if not, I think moving forward next year that I'm going to do an ongoing case study. I think that would be very beneficial for you guys. Any other questions? Rebecca, thank you. We appreciate you watching. If that's it, I'm going to let all of you all go. I'm going to stop recording.